Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Awareness Podcast. I'm your host, Susan Telford, and I'm delighted to have as my guest today, Stephan Bodian. Welcome, Stephan. It's lovely to have you here.
Lovely to be with you, Susan. Thanks so much.
So I'll just let you know a little bit about Stephan if you're not familiar with his work. Stephan began his spiritual practice with Suzuki Roshi, who was the author of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind in the 70s, I believe, Stephan, and received ordination as a monk in the Zen tradition from Koban Chino. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Stephan left the monastic life in the 80s, and then he spent 10 years as a student of the Advaita teacher Jean Klein. And after Jean's death in 1998, spent time in intimate study with Adyashanti, who invited him to teach. As well as being a spiritual teacher, Stephan is also a psychotherapist, and he has been a pioneer in the integration of Eastern wisdom and Western psychology and the embodiment of awakened awareness in everyday life. His approach to teaching and counselling blends compassionate self-inquiry, non-dual insight, and transformational techniques from the field of psychotherapy. He draws on decades of experience as both a therapist and a spiritual teacher, and he specialises in offering guidance that is custom tailored to the needs of each individual seeker. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Stephan. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. My particular segment on the Awareness Podcast is called Integrating Spiritual Awakening in Everyday Life. So I feel as though our conversation is going to be very useful in giving pointers to that to those who are listening. So as I said before we started to record, I've read both your books over the last few days. Stephan's written 2 books, Beyond Mindfulness and Wake Up Now, and I highly recommend both of them to you. So Stephan, as we begin our conversation, I think it might be useful to define some terms so that we know that we're speaking about the same things. So from your perspective, what is the difference between the direct path and the progressive path? And can you say a little bit about what each one offers?
Yeah, that's a really crucial question. As someone who spent years studying the progressive approach, although Zen, would be considered one of the more direct paths, but still it was taught in a progressive way. And the understanding behind progressive approaches, and again, I want to begin by saying that I have utmost respect for the progressive approaches, and they do have great benefits. So, I bow with appreciation, but the approach I offer is different. So progressive approach, it has as its basis the understanding that we are doing certain practices over a time to achieve certain goals. As my teacher Jean Klein used to say, end gaming. And so, the end of our efforts would be, better concentration, better awareness in the present moment, deepened mindfulness. Ultimately, in certain traditions, you cultivate certain mind states and heart states like compassion, loving kindness, right? Very important in the Buddhist tradition. And in essence, you're making yourself a better person, right? But the problem with that approach, there are several problems with that approach. One is that it reinforces the sense of a separate person who needs to improve or get somewhere, or who's doing the meditating, right? And that can be very hard to shake once that's been deeply ingrained, So if you do a progressive approach for years and years and years, it's going to be very hard for you to let go of your identity as a seasoned meditator, someone who's meditated for 20 years and achieved this level of understanding, right? Unfortunately, that's the ultimate direction we're heading, is to see through the construct of a separate self, right? I mean, that's where all the progressive approaches, at least in the Buddhist tradition, are heading ultimately, but it can be very difficult in the end, after you've acquired all these qualities and states and attainments, to let go of that identity. And it also gives you the mistaken view that what I'm trying to achieve is something external to myself, something that requires effort over a period of time to develop, to cultivate. The big word in progressive approaches is cultivate. But in the direct approach, okay, yeah, did you want to say something? I see you.
Yes, I was just going to say that there's a sense that it's other than as I am now.
That's right.
And that it's somewhere in the future, maybe not even in this lifetime. And by lots,
if you're a Tibetan practitioner, you're probably thinking in terms of future lifetimes. In Zen, they don't talk about that much, but you know.
As I said to you before, I was a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, and you know, the precious human birth was very much emphasized, you know, to practice as though your hair was on fire, because taking a precious human birth was as uncommon as a turtle popping its head through a ring in the middle of the ocean.
Right, exactly. That head on fire image actually turns up in Zen. We used to say that too. So it's interesting how that image gets around. It's a very powerful one.
It is very powerful. So how was that for you then, Stephan? Because you were a Zen monk, you know, not just a lay practitioner, you were an ordained Zen monk for 10 years. So how did that play out for you? And how did you come to the point where you wanted to seek something else or left that tradition?
Well, you know, I was a very dedicated Zen practitioner. I was one of these kind of obsessive fundamentalist Buddhists, you know, who would, you know, do everything exactly right and fold his robes exactly right and, you know, sit those long retreats. And I was really gung-ho and very dedicated. But at a certain point, several things happened. One was I realized that finally, after many years, that I really didn't feel like I was getting anywhere, you know, that nothing was happening, that no illumination was happening. And of course, you're taught, you know, that nothing is going to happen until it does, and, you know, to be patient and to just keep going. And but at a certain point, I realized that my practice had become very dry and effortful. And I didn't feel like there was any juice left. And I didn't feel I was closer to recognizing the truth. So that was at a personal level. And then at a more organizational level, I could see, I could sense that there was something wrong in the organization. There was something amiss. And I finally realized that I couldn't continue being in a position that I was. I was being groomed to be, you know, to be one of the disciples of this teacher. I already was one of his students, but, you know, to be one of his transmitted disciples. And I realized that I couldn't do that in all truth. And be true to myself as a human being. I also realized that there was not much room for me. There was no room for me as I was, as a person. I felt I was being fit into a box. And what actually happened was I started doing some psychotherapy with one of the students at the center where I was teaching, and stuff started really coming up, you know. And I realized, wait a second, you know, there's all of this inside of me that isn't really being embraced. Unresolved trauma, you know, unresolved feelings, that there was no room for that. So at a certain point, I had to make a choice. So I chose to leave, which was very difficult because my whole life was about this. I mean, I had nothing else. You know, I had left graduate school to become a monk. This was it. This is what I've been doing for the previous 10 years. But I had no choice.
Yeah, I can imagine that it would be a difficult transition.
Yeah.
So shortly after that, you met Jean Klein, is that right?
Not actually shortly. I left in 82. This was, I had begun my Zen practice in 1969. So I left in 82 after 12, 13 years. But at that point, I didn't go looking for another teacher. I didn't find another teacher. I just went into psychotherapy, actually. Went to a couple of men's retreats. I started exploring other things at that point. Didn't do so much sitting, although I did a little Vipassana. I studied with a Tibetan teacher for a few years. So I had my finger in the Buddhist pie, you could say. But it wasn't until 1988, 6 years later, that a friend introduced me to Jean Klein. There was a lot that I had to do in terms of there's a lot of psychological material in leaving the monastery, in a sense, killing the father. Those were the images that came out. There's a lot to do with authority figures, the inner father. There's a lot of psychological work to be done. It was very difficult to leave because of my whole identity being tied up in it. So that was psychologically very challenging. But it wasn't until 88 when then a friend introduced me to Jean Klein. And at first I thought, no, I don't know who this person is. He's not a Buddhist for sure. But then at a certain point I thought, I realized this guy, he isn't a Buddhist. He doesn't use Buddhist words, but whatever he's got, I want that, And I thought, this is my teacher. And at a certain point that became very clear. So, yeah.
Yeah. So what did you learn from him?
Everything.
What was
Jean Klein was my guru, Whatever I know, it was transmitted by Jean, And it's only become more and more clear over the years, but everything was there from the very beginning. Yeah. So I can't divide or say I learned this from Jean. It was everything. The truth of our being. It was shortly after I met Jean Klein that I had a very powerful awakening, which then, within a year, actually, because I was ripe. I'd done the foundational work of years and years of meditation, which I think has benefit, even though, as we see, it can.
I think that's a really good point to emphasize, actually. You're in no way saying that those 10 years of Zen were a complete waste of time.
That's what I said. I bow to the progressive approach. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, I think those years of practice kind of softened me up, you could say, prepared me. Not like I would say to people, please, go into a monastery for 10 years to do that. But there's no doubt that it prepared me. And then stopping meditation and not doing it very much for a period of years, prepared me to meet Jean Klein, who said, there's no need to meditate. The only reason to meditate is to discover the meditator, he said. I never heard it put that way.
Yeah, the only reason to meditate is to discover the meditator. Yeah. I remember, having done Tibetan Buddhist meditation for many years. I did a short course on true meditation with Adyashanti, based on Adyashanti's book, True Meditation.
Of course.
And at first, I was so angry. This is not meditation. What's he talking about? This is not meditation. But I had a real different seeing from putting aside everything I thought I knew about meditation and just practicing in the way that Ajahn lay out in that book.
Oh, beautiful. It's kind of interesting because I use true meditation when I teach, but I also use, for example, the detailed meditations instructions of Digo Khyentse Rinpoche. And if you read that, it's almost exactly the same as what Ajahn is saying. Mm. So that teaching of how to meditate is right there in the Tibetan tradition. Yeah, from the Dzogchen point of view.
Yeah. I think I had, like you, I was, wanted to do it all properly and measured my success at meditation for how long I could sit for, how long I could sit without thought. All those extraneous things have nothing to do with your true nature.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the difference between an intellectual understanding of the teachings and realization.
Right. Well, that's key, isn't it? Jean Klein used to talk about a geometrical representation. You know, it's like you have this structure. You see it all. It's all very clear to you. But then, you know, it has to be realized, right? You know, a geometrical, an intellectual, a conceptual understanding of the truth, again, it can have a great value. And, you know, that's what people, I think, are doing when they're reading my books and other people's books. Hopefully, they're getting more out of it than that. But the conceptual understanding is very clearly laid out. And that prepares you, to a certain degree, for when you actually wake up. You know, there's a wonderful story from, I'm not sure what tradition it comes from, about a man who was an expert in dragons. Everyone came to him from far and wide. You know, he wrote books about dragons. You know, he did paintings of dragons. He was an expert about dragons. And then one day a real dragon came by and breathed fire through his window, and he disappeared and was never heard from again. See, so we can be experts on dragons, but until we meet the true dragon, which is a phrase that's used in Zen, your true dragon is your true nature. Until you meet the true dragon, you know, you haven't, as Jean Klein would say, your car has never left the garage. So, you know, to get your car out of the garage, you know, you got to sit down and do some inquiry and, you know, sit quietly and open and really follow the instructions, put it into practice. And that's, of course, a lot of what I do in my workshops in the School for Awakening, of course, which I offer every year, is very much about practice and, you know, inquiring and looking deeply into the nature of reality.
I think a point you make very well in, I'm forgetting which book it is because I've just read them both, but a point you make very well is to be really clear that you want this, because it changes everything.
Changes everything. Yeah, I say it in the school too. In the first class, we talk about that, the motivation. You know, in the Tibetan tradition, they say everything rides on the tip of your motivation. So your motivation, your aspiration is the key. You know, to really want it, as if to save your head from fire, as we talked about, that is really important, you know, most important. And heartfelt, obviously. This comes from the heart.
Yeah. I think it comes to the point where it feels like there is no choice.
That's right.
That I'm not making the choice, that somehow it has taken on some kind of life of its own, and that can sometimes truth is
wanting to awaken to itself through you.
Yes.
You know.
So that brings us to a discussion maybe about spiritual ego.
Oh, okay.
Because the opposite of that, you know, sense of this is emerging, truth is as you said, wanting to wake up through this body, mind, or is this concept of spiritual ego. So first of all, define for us what's meant by spiritual ego and how to watch for that operating, because I think it's really subtle. It can be operating when we think we're on you know the question.
Sure. Yeah, I don't use that term that often, but I think it's really an important one. I totally agree with that understanding. You know, the idea that I can awaken is spiritual ego.
Yes. Who's the I?
Yes. Yeah, the individual cannot.
I am awakened.
I cannot.
Enlightened.
Yeah, or I am enlightened. Yeah. I mean, enlightenment is the very nature of who you are. It's your very essence. But I am enlightened? No. And as soon as you think I am enlightened, you've gone astray. You've lost it, right? So that's essentially spiritual ego. You know, the identification of a separate someone with the awakening that you've had. You know, I wrote a poem after a retreat many years ago when this became very clear. It's the separate self can't become enlightened no matter how many retreats you attend. Everything is just the way it is. That's enlightenment. So when you recognize that everything is just the way it is, the innate perfection, Dzogchen, the innate perfection of everything, that is awakening, and then it's happening here, but there's no way you could possibly identify with it. Yeah.
Thank you.
And of course, that's where, teachers who go astray are coming from, of course. They've somehow co-opted the experience that they've had for a separate self,
How do we watch for that? What are the signs?
I don't really focus too much on having people watch for that. People always tend to be sort of monitoring themselves and already hyper vigilant. I'm more into letting people relax and open and let things be as they are. And once you are in the habit or the practice, you could say, of being, really open and allowing everything to be as it is, which is the fundamental practice as I teach it, and as Adya teaches it in true meditation, of course. There's really only one approach here. Once you do that, then everything is arising in this openness. So you will see very clearly those moments when the mind is trying to co-opt awakening for itself. That will be clear in this space, in this openness that you are. Once you realize yourself as the openness, spiritual ego can't establish a foothold, but that's where the devotion comes in. You're devoted to truth at every level, every level, not just the absolute truth, but the relative truth, seeing through the ways that you get stuck and identified. So it's this devotion to truth at every level that I really emphasize, rather than emphasizing spiritual ego, it's devotion to truth. Yeah.
And I think for those of us that have come via a progressive path, what arises is, yes, but what do I do?
Right. That's the question I get.
That's
the
how
most.
I spot it in myself. Is but what do I do though?
Yes, what do I do?
Yeah. What's next? What have I can't do nothing. I must have to do something.
That's right.
That's just still a belief that's
the most common question I get.
Yeah.
And it's the most common question where people get stuck. And if it makes sense, we spent our life doing, we were taught to do, to accomplish, to get somewhere. And that's very deeply conditioned. And so, again, to have compassion for ourselves, always underneath all of this. This is not about self-perfection. It's about, having utmost compassion for oneself and all of our conditioned tendencies. So that's one of the most conditioned of all, is the sense that I need to do something to get somewhere. Again, the progressive approach. And the progressive approaches reinforce that. And again, that's one of the limitations.
You mentioned two terms there that I would like you to clarify for our audience: absolute truth and relative truth.
Right. Yeah, absolute and relative. This is called the doctrine of the two truths, which is common to both Advaita Vedanta and Mahayana Buddhism, which teaches fundamentally that, there's the absolute dimension of reality, and then there's the relative dimension of reality, and that those are intimately entwined and ultimately one, but that we need to also understand those different tracks. The image, I think, that brings those two together best, it's talked about in the Zen tradition at great length, and in the Vedanta tradition, is the image of the cross, actually. The vertical and the horizontal meet in this timeless moment. Yeah? This meeting of the vertical and the horizontal is this one, walking through time and space, right? But the vertical is the absolute, the timeless, the essential, right? The universal. And the relative is the horizontal, moving through time and space, you know, this body and mind, these preferences, this conditioning, and these two come together in each moment, here and now, right? So in each moment, we are living as this body mind in relationship with our partners and our, you know, loved ones and our friends and our colleagues and all of that, moving through life in that way, which is very important in terms of embodiment integration, which is the theme you're talking about. And in fact, I'm offering this fall a group, ongoing group, for people who've been to the school or others who have had some awakening, called Chop Wood, Carry Water, which is very much about, you know, integrating in everyday life, embodying in everyday life, living at the relative level, informed always by the vertical, by the timeless. How do we live as the timeless in time and space? That's the mystery of the two truths, the absolute and relative. Because really, to me, that is one of the deepest truths in the spiritual traditions, is this, and I mean, that's what Jesus was talking about. I mean, that's why the mystery of the Christ is so powerful for people, because he was, and each one of us is, but he was the emblem of, you know, the encapsulation of that coming together of absolute and relative. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. I like that image. And that's the path, really, isn't it? To be that knowingly.
Be that knowingly. Yeah, beautifully put. Yes.
Yes. In your book, Beyond Mindfulness, you talk about some, I mean, mindfulness is a very popular practice. It's been, I think, popularized by people like Jon Kabat-Zinn, and the mindfulness, I'll probably get this wrong, mindfulness stress-based, what is it, MS?
Yeah, mindfulness-based stress reduction, yeah, MBSR.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. That's a great practice and has great benefits, again,
yes.
for many people, yeah. Yes,
but that said, you speak in your book about some pitfalls that there can be there. You talk about the difference between spacious awareness and detached observation, and how we can get stuck in the witness mode. So can you say more about that, please?
Well, I think you've said it. You know, we can get stuck in detachment, and also in the sense that we can get stuck in the sense that mindfulness is something that we do and not something that we are. See, awareness is what we are. You know, I sometimes have people close their eyes, and then I will say, okay, now when you open your eyes, I want you to try to be aware. You know, so open your eyes and try to be aware. And they say, well, what do you mean, try to be aware?
I am aware.
Doesn't make any sense, right? So awareness is happening always. You don't have to try to be aware. And as soon as you try to be aware, the mind is coming in and doing an imitation of awareness, see? Yes. And that's what a lot of mindfulness is. It's the mind's attempt to imitate awareness, you see? So the mind's doing a very good job. I had this realization once on retreat, and I just broke out into laughter. I thought, I'm sitting here, and the mind's doing a really good job of imitating awareness, while all the while there's this boundless awareness that's everywhere, all inclusive, happening without any effort on my part. And suddenly when I realized that, it was all over, you know. But it's like, wait a second, this makes no sense, right? So to have that breakthrough can be very helpful, but you know, to be told that there's no reason to try to be mindful, try to be aware. Awareness is happening always. Yeah. Just join the awareness that's already taking place. You know, fall into, become one with the awareness that's already taking place. And in fact, you can't even become one with it because you are one with it. So just recognize that. Yeah.
It really is the end of doing, isn't it? Everywhere you look, there's nothing to do.
Yeah. That's right.
Yes. Yeah. Um, the next thing that I wanted to ask you, I loved, there was a sentence, again, I've forgotten which book, but you had a sentence that I absolutely loved, and I wrote it down. It's this belief that there is something wrong with you and you need to be a better you before you can be the real you.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Again, yeah, that's well put. You don't have to be a better you. Again, that is the progressive approach. And, so many people come to these practices with a sense of inadequacy. I mean, as a psychotherapist, of course, that is the primary illness or sickness, if there's such a thing. I don't really believe in that, but if there's any illness, it's the sense of inadequacy, right? That we all suffer from. Not good enough. I'm not enough, right? And then you come to a meditation technique or approach, which then reinforces that. I'm not enough. I need to meditate. I need to be more mindful. If I'm not more mindful, then I'm not good enough. So it just reinforces that. Whereas in the direct approach, there's a sense of an inherent wakefulness and inherent, you could say, goodness. Or as Trungpa used to say, basic sanity.
Basic sanity, yes.
Yeah, basic goodness, that we can rely on. That's always there, basic awareness. Yeah.
Because I think there can be such a tendency to, especially if you practice a progressive path for a long time and you're not having any glimpses of your true nature.
That's right. Not making any progress.
Yeah. The first thing that you think is, well, I'm doing it wrong.
That's right.
So it's my inadequacy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Again, that's another question or issue that comes up a lot when I work with people. And mostly what I'll say is just keep going. Just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep letting go of trying and trying to accomplish anything. But that's so counterintuitive for the mind. What do you mean, let go of trying? I can't even begin to understand what that means.
Yes.
Because the mind is based on trying.
Yeah.
And
if it hasn't happened with all the trying, how's it going to happen if I don't try? That seems counterintuitive.
That's right. How is it going to happen if I don't try? Yeah.
Yeah. So paradoxes, that was the next thing that I wanted to talk about. There are lots of paradoxes, aren't there? Things like, I'm already home. I'm already my true nature. I already am my true nature. It already is here, and yet there seems to be a seeking, and this sense of the seeking happens until it exhausts itself.
Right.
Speak about that, the sort of paradox of being already there and feeling that we're not.
Yeah, that's what I call the gateless gate paradox, or sometimes called the open secret, which is very common in Zen. The notion of the gateless gate or the gateless barrier. The sense is when you go through the gate, you realize that there was never a gate, there was never a barrier to begin with. Everything is as it is, everything's perfect, awareness is our true nature. But until you go through the gate, the barrier, the gate seems insurmountable, see? And that's a paradox, because as if you don't go through the gate, you're not going to realize it for yourself. So you can stand outside the gate and say, oh yeah, I've read all the books, I know there really is no gate. But if you're outside the gate and the truth is over there and you can't see it for yourself, you're still going to feel cut off from it, see? So until you actually go through the gate, again, wake up, then it won't be yours, you see? It won't have become your own, and it won't transform your life, which is the whole point of waking up. If it doesn't change your life, it isn't genuine awakening.
So can you point, right in this moment, can you point listeners towards their true nature? What's
I can, but that's why they want to take the course. But so come join us in the course, and you'll have all kinds of pointers. We'll have
Okay,
for
that's a
classes.
good answer, Stephan.
Yeah, I mean, we want people to, I mean, I can give you a pointer, of course, if it works for you, great, you know, then fantastic. But, you know, the ultimate pointer, the one that's used most often, is to reflect on that which is aware. You know, in each moment, experiences are happening, huh? You know, we can hear the sound of the birds. I can hear your voice. I see you in, you know, on the Zoom screen. I can feel my body in space, touching into the, you know, all of this is happening now. But what is it that's aware of that? You know, can you find that? Because we use the word I all the time. It's probably the most popular word in our vocabulary besides the and right? I think this, I feel this, I know this, I have this. But who is this I who's actually experiencing this moment right now? Can you find it? Okay. Where is it located? And once you find it, what's aware of that? You see? So this is, again, kind of paradoxical, pointing you to that which really can't be, you see, because awareness is that which is aware. Anything you can become aware of can't be awareness, because awareness is aware of that. But you can wake up to that awareness. So that's one of the paradoxes. Okay, follow that for a while and see where that takes you. Yeah. And then come to the class. I'll explore it further.
We'll speak about the class in a moment. There's one more question that I'd like to ask you before we talk about the class that you're going to be offering for us in October. 4 classes, in fact, not just a class.
Yeah, a course, 4 classes.
Of course, yes. One of the other hosts on the Awareness podcast is a lady from England called Jenny Beale, who has been a student of both Rupert Spira and Francis Lucille, who I know that you, he was a disciple of Jean Klein at the same time as you. And she has taken as her segment, we've all got different titles for our segments. Her segment is Living in Not Knowing. Which was a phrase that Jean Klein used. So what does that mean, living in not knowing? You mentioned not knowing in your book, Wake Up Now. So from your perspective, which I'm assuming is going to be quite similar, having come from the same horse's mouth, as it were.
Although she did not study from Jean Klein, with Jean Klein, she studied with Rupert Spira and Francis Lucille. Yeah.
So it's been filtered through them. Yes. So I want to ask you directly, for you, what does it mean to live in not knowing?
Well, the fact is, we are living in not knowing.
Okay, but we think that we do.
We think we know. Yeah. We have the illusion that we know, but in fact we are.
No.
I'm sorry?
What is it that we don't know?
The next moment. We don't know anything. I mean, what do we know? We have memories of the past. We have concepts floating through our mind. But in terms of actually knowing anything, what do we know? You know? So to recognize that we don't know is to live knowingly in not knowing. Right?
Yeah.
And so it really is about recognizing that you don't know. And that anything you think you know is an illusion. See, because you don't know what's going to happen. You walk out of your door, then in the next moment, you know, you pick up the telephone, or you open the refrigerator. Who knows what's going to happen in any moment? So we don't know, and to live in from not knowing is the truth. You know, it's living as the truth, in the truth. Yeah.
At first, for me, that brought up some fear, because.
Right.
There's part of me that really wants to know, because there was all this control stuff that needed to be let go of.
Absolutely.
Actually, as I've worked through that, what has arisen is a tremendous sense of freedom.
Yeah, that's right.
No, don't need to know.
Right.
Joy arises there.
Yeah, joy, you said. Yes, joy. That's right. That's right. Joy. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk now about the course that you're going to be offering for us. The title is Discover Your Natural State of Awakened Awareness. And there's going to be 4 classes in October, starting October the 3rd. They're going to be at noon Eastern time for, I think, 90 minutes each. And the first one you mentioned this, you can maybe just say a little bit more about it. Class 1 is called The Gateless Gate. So you've already mentioned. So what will people get from that class, Stephan?
Well, again, I divided into classes because I was asked to, but I don't really necessarily think in those terms. You'll get everything all the time. It'll all be there. I don't really divide so much like that, although, to some extent I will. It'll probably be more intuitive as it unfolds. But the Gateless Gate, I think, is to introduce us to the importance, as I mentioned, of realizing it for ourselves, and to recognize that conceptual understanding, again, coming back to thinking we know, the illusion of knowing, conceptual understanding is just a step, a helpful step, but it isn't enough to carry us across the threshold into the truth of our true nature. And so the importance of actually waking up is what we'll be talking about, I would say, in that first class, and probably talking a little about what awakening is, but primarily seeing beyond the concepts.
Yeah,
I was just picked up. And what's, I find working with people is that so many people come to the School for Awakening or to a satsang or to any gathering, having picked up so many concepts, spiritual concepts. There's a lot of non-dual teaching happening out there right now. And, you can pick up a lot of great ideas, but only take you so far.
I was just smiling at me asking you what you're going to be teaching in October when we've just finished talking about not knowing.
There you go. We'll see when we get to October,
yeah.
Susan.
even if we get to October.
We'll have fun. That's right. Yeah, if we get to October. We'll have fun.
I'll just briefly say what the other classes are about. So class 2 is called Beyond Mindfulness, which we've spoken a bit about. Yeah,
we've talked about a lot today.
Yeah, you said resting in awareness and letting everything be as it is. Class 3 is called Spontaneous Awakening, distinguishing an authentic realization from passive spiritual states, which we've
very important.
About.
Yeah.
And you said as well, how to deepen and abide. So that really is the integration, isn't it? In this
right.
Of that, the intersection of the vertical and the horizontal. And the 4th class is called Embodying the Light. Once you have a clear recognition, then it's a lifelong journey. It's not one and done, is it? It's not that, I'm there now. It's a constant unfolding and deepening.
Right. Yeah, I am there now. See again, the illusion of a separate self being enlightened. I am there now.
Yes.
Can't happen, won't happen. If that's what you expect, this is not the path for you.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing revelation, as I talk about.
Revelation. And that brings me to something that just popped in my head to ask you. How much of this awakening is grace?
All of it.
All of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's such a... I don't even know how to describe that. That has such an effect on me, that realization that it's grace.
Yeah, you have to keep letting go and letting go and letting go and letting it reveal itself.
Yeah. Yes. There was another little paragraph that I just copied and pasted on my document here from your book. And this was kind of how it was for me. I went through quite a difficult time beforehand. And you wrote, like Job, you may even have the good fortune to find yourself stripped of everything you hold dear and pleading with God for a voice from the whirlwind to reveal to your tear-filled eyes the truth of your existence. In such moments, only the absolute truth will suffice. That is beautiful, Stephan.
Yeah, great. Yeah, yeah, it is beautiful. Thanks. Yeah,
It really
yeah.
is. So I am very much looking forward to these 4 classes with you. And for those listening, all the details that you need to join us in October will be provided in the show notes, together with details of the work that Stephan does, his School of Awakening, and upcoming classes that he is offering. All of that will be provided for you in the show notes. So thank you so much for meeting with me. It's Sunday morning as we're recording this.
Right.
I've been able to hear the beautiful swifts in the background. Stephen's in Spain at the moment, so it's been lovely to talk to you, Stephan. Thank you so much.
Lovely to talk with you, Susan. Yeah.
For being my guest today. Thanks for
My
listening,
pleasure.
everybody.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.